Hello, writer, and welcome back to my life. It's Writer Wednesday, the day that I talk about the art and the business of writing and tell you how I do what I do as an indie author. Today we're going to get into some numbers and some monies. We're going to talk about diversifying your income, both how you do it and what you can expect. I'm going to go over the primary ways we diversify our income at Legacy Books, and I'm going to give you some numbers and percentages of what portion of our income comes from which sources. And this is primarily going to relate to my experience as an indie author and now an indie small press, a micro publisher. If you're a traditionally published author, or if you're trying to be, this video might not be as applicable, though I hope it's still helpful. So when you start to make it as an indie author, what usually happens is you start to sell a lot of ebooks. More ebooks are distributed throughout the world than print books by a large number, and the profit margin on ebooks is much higher than print. So yeah, if you succeeded as an indie, it's almost certainly with ebooks. However, once you've reached a point where your writing income is substantial, and maybe you've even gone full-time as an author, it's time to start looking at earnings from more than just ebooks. The reasons why are simple. As much as possible, you don't want to have all your eggs in one basket. If you're earning all your money from one place and then you lose that income for any reason, you're totally hosed if you don't have backup sources of money. So the first and most obvious way to diversify your income is by looking at where you're publishing your ebooks. I just made a video recently about publishing exclusively to Amazon versus wide. Kindle Unlimited is the best option in some cases, but publishing wide is the best option in others. You should always be reevaluating this and seeing how you could do it better, because it won't always be the same answer forever. Here's one thing you might want to think about that we're probably going to be doing in the future: publishing both wide and in Kindle Unlimited. If you've got a big enough back catalog of books, you can sort of rotate them into and out of Kindle Unlimited. This makes sure that you always have some titles on the other platforms for people to discover, and at the same time, it can incentivize Kindle Unlimited readers to read your books more quickly. You know how sometimes Netflix will let you know, hey, that Marvel movie you really love just became available, and you'll make sure to watch it that week because who knows how long it's going to be on Netflix. You can maybe play the same game on Kindle Unlimited. If you have a title that's sold well on Amazon and then you add it to Kindle Unlimited, Amazon will send an alert out to KU readers telling them they can download it. And so if you're constantly moving titles into and out of the program, it can be possible to get the best of both worlds and really diversify your ebook income. Or at least it can be in theory. We haven't tried this yet, though we're going to be doing so in the coming months. Percentage-wise, it's a little hard to tell you how this breaks down. I can say that about 60% of our ebook income currently comes from Kindle Unlimited, so there's no chance we're going to be pulling all our books from the program in the foreseeable future. And I can tell you that in the past, when we were publishing to the other platforms, all of them combined were only accounting for about 10% of our ebook income, if that. However, things may change in the future as we start to put some titles on all platforms and then try to get BookBubs for them. BookBub is very reticent to take books that are Amazon exclusive, so we're hoping that by publishing some titles wide, we can increase our income on all platforms, including Amazon. Stay tuned for that. I'm certain it's going to be the topic of some future Writer Wednesday videos. The next biggest and easiest way to increase your income stream is through print sales. You're probably already familiar with CreateSpace and Ingram Spark / Lightning Source. You create book files, you upload them to the platform, and your books become available for sale on Amazon. Now, here's the thing. Amazon may be the biggest bookseller in the world, but it earned that title by selling lots of different books, not necessarily by selling huge numbers of any one book. Unless you're a New York Times bestselling author with heavy publisher promotion behind you, you're not going to make a ton of money selling print books on Amazon. You should absolutely still do it. I make anywhere from a few $100 to a couple of $1,000s a month selling print on Amazon, but just realize that on my best month ever, online print sales were only about 20% of ebook sales. There's another option when it comes to print sales, however, and it ties into yet another way to diversify your income, and that's live events. We're currently gearing up to do our first Comic-Con in September, and to prepare for it, we started throwing up a tent at our local farmers market every week. It's given us practice for how to do live events in the first place, and it's turned into a nice little income boost. Our farmers market is actually very small compared to some other nearby markets we're trying to get into, but we still pull in a few $100 each time we show up there. Add that up each month, and live event print sales, separate from our online sales, have become about 10% of our total income. At a con with more than 40,000 people in attendance, well, let's just say I'm really looking forward to telling you how September went. When you start getting into live events, you open the door to another new stream of income, and that's merchandise. Now, here's the really tough thing about merchandise. It is only purchased by superfans. So first of all, you have to try to create superfans with your work. You have to create a world or characters that your readers want to identify with, who they'll want to be and be around. And then you have to create merchandise that gives them that feeling of belonging that they proudly identify with. Here's the thing. At Legacy Books, we have never been very successful with merchandise. We have some of the superfaniest superfans I've ever seen in the indie author space, but merch is still a very tough nut for us to crack. And when I say we've never been successful with it, there have been very few months where merchandise exceeded 1% of our total company income. Now, this may change as we continue to do more live events and create more visual properties for our readers, such as more artwork and possibly even future graphic novels. But realize that because we work in a primarily written word-focused medium, you might have difficulty difficulty getting people to pay for visual representations of something they don't already identify with. Unless you find a way to be much more visual with the products you've sold your readers in the first place. All right, the next two primary ways of diversifying your business income are very related to each other, and they are audiobooks and podcasts. If you've been in the indie space at all, you know a lot about audiobook production. Nearly everyone does it, and with good reason. For the last couple of years, audiobooks have been the fastest growing portion of the entire publishing industry. As for how they've been for legacy books in general, well, again, on this one I have to say that we haven't found tremendous success. We originally tried publishing audiobooks through ACX, which I do not recommend, and then with an audiobook production company. In neither case did we see a very large amount of income, maybe 1% or 2% of our total earnings. We think there's a number of reasons why that might be. We don't think either the first audiobooks we did ourselves or through the production company were quite to the standards we would like to achieve for our audiobooks. We're starting a new audiobook project right now. I'm excited to start putting it out there. I think it will be of a high enough quality for us to feel good about selling and marketing it, and we have a pretty kick-ass idea for marketing it. And that brings us to the next income stream, podcasts. There's a number of ways you can monetize podcasts while still keeping them very much on brand with you as an indie author. As for what type of podcast you should create, that very much depends on you. I have tried doing nonfiction, talk show, sort of writer education podcasts. I didn't like it. It fell apart every time. It just isn't my thing. Podcasts about things going on in fiction or pop culture or geek culture can get you a large audience. You just need to actually be interested in those things. And they're pretty genre specific. Like if you write thrillers or romance, doing a podcast about the Marvel films isn't really gonna do you any favors, even if you like the Marvel films. Whereas if I were to, just as a totally random example, start doing a weekly podcast about J.R.R. Tolkien, one could imagine that that would be a successful podcast for getting people interested in legacy books. If I were to do that! And the final podcast category that can be very, very good for indie authors is a straight-up fiction podcast. This is essentially a sort of audiobook version of your book distributed in podcast form instead. It can be one single person or it can be a multi-cast narrative production. This can be used to market your books. It can definitely be used to market your audiobooks, which we are going to attempt to do with an upcoming podcast for sure. But there are ways to monetize the podcast itself. First is obviously sponsorships. Lots of podcasts get sponsors. Most podcast listeners will have heard hundreds of ads for Audible or Squarespace or Blue Apron or Casper mattresses. The thing is, to get a decent amount of sponsorship money, you have to have a decent sized audience. And as with literally everything else I do in business, my attitude is if you have a decent sized audience, why not try selling them your product instead of someone else's? And as an author, you have a product to sell them, and probably a recurring product, because you have something new to sell every time you release a new book. Or the other way you can turn a podcast into a source of income is through Patreon or a similar crowdfunding platform. A simple little plug in each episode of your podcast to support you on Patreon can slowly turn into a steady income source for you. And that word steady is very carefully chosen and very important. All of the streams of income we've discussed in this video are volatile. Sales will go up and down, you'll release a new book or get a book bub, and income will spike and then tank. And the wonderful thing about Patreon is that it is almost entirely consistent. Even if it's not a large portion of your income, you can be sure you'll get it every month or every time you release a podcast episode or whatever. That's important. Some months Patreon has only been 2% of my income, but sometimes it's been 15%. And on those months, I'm really, really glad I set it up, and I'm always trying to grow it. Patreon brings us around to our final way of diversifying your income, which is YouTube, or another similar content creation platform. I've talked a lot about why I do YouTube in the first place, but in summary, it's a way to create content in between my books, which are my main content. It's a way to stay connected with and communicate to my audience, very much including you, even when I don't have a new book to sell you. And if you think that sounds like cold capitalist marketing speak, it's really not. I would not be able to keep doing what I'm doing if I wasn't able to talk to people here on YouTube. My mind would implode. If you get a big enough audience on YouTube, you can of course turn on advertisements on your channel, which can become an income source for you. Or as with podcasts, you can accept sponsorships on your channel to earn that extra income. I do not do either of those things because I just ask my viewers on YouTube to support me on Patreon instead. YouTube advertising dollars have never been a significant portion of my income, but that's just the way I like it. However, some authors have turned sizable YouTube channels into a good amount of money through ads or sponsored deals. And it's worth mentioning that there are other monetized creation platforms out there. For instance, Medium will now pay you for articles you write on their website. I just can't talk much about those other platforms because I rarely, if ever, use them, and so I'm not familiar with how they work. So those are all the ways in which I am familiar with turning your indie author business into more sources of income than just ebooks. And those are rough percentages we earn from all the different ways we monetize monetize our business. If you have other methods of monetizing, please let me know in the comments below. I'm always looking for new ideas. And if you found this video helpful, as I said before, I really appreciate my supporters on Patreon. If you want to toss in even $1 a month, that is awesome and helpful. And who knows, you might end up being 20% of my income. But I hope you aren't. No offense. $5 patrons also get to request topics for future Writer Wednesday videos and see the videos 2 weeks in advance. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next Wednesday. Bye!